OCT ultra-wide field, two machines have recently received CE marking. Field size, utility, and especially which model to choose are the questions I asked Dr. Maté Streho. Dr. Streho, we are here today to talk about OCT ultra-wide field. So first, let's define what ultra-wide field is.
Indeed. Thank you, Martin, for coming to see these new machines. We already knew that in retinal imaging there was wide field and ultra-wide field, but it turns out that in the era of OCT today, we have entered the era of wide field and also ultra-wide field.
This is a term we have been hearing at conferences for some time. The big difference is that these machines have finally received CE marking. These two machines are right next to each other. We will have the little brother and the big brother. Please explain.
Exactly. So in fact, this is the family reunion of the TowardPi range of OCT. And that is why I wanted you to come see, because we are in real life. We are in everyday practice in the clinic with patients waiting outside. And indeed, with the CE marking, we can now use the first generation of wide and ultra-wide field OCT with this technology that we will be able to use for our patients. And what is interesting is to be able to see both available today.
Before we go into detail about the two machines, there are already two machines. What is the difference between these two machines?
Indeed, it is interesting to have both ranges. We have the little brother, which is already quite robust, and the big brother with different fields. But it turns out that both devices have a combo activity, meaning they already have the capability to view the anterior segment, the cornea, the lens, but also the posterior segment with all the modules we know, the optic nerve, the macula, and the retina.
We will go into detail about these two machines. Let's start with the little brother, who is already very large.
Absolutely, the term little brother, but he's already quite robust, and compared to what we have today on the market, it is more than sufficient, because as you can see on the screen, we already have a visualization. And so we are on a truly new generation technology called swap source full range. And that is important because we have known the era of time domain, spectral domain, and now it is the evolution towards swap source full range.
Swap source full range. Let's explain what is the big difference.
So the big difference is that we have a wavelength, meaning that in OCT, there is a light source with a very specific wavelength. And this wavelength is a little bit higher. We are above 1000 nanometers, which will have excellent tissue penetration. And there have already been first generations of swap source OCT that showed excellent tissue penetration, which means that the signal can reach very deep structures. And thus, we will have excellent visualization of all retinal structures, even the deepest ones.
So this is indeed a significant upgrade compared to the OCTs we currently had.
Yes, and this interest is clinical, but it is also for the patient, because with the acquisition speed of 100,000 scans, 400,000 scans, we have an acquisition speed that is so fast that, for example, for the patient, before they saw the red line scrolling, now the patient sees nothing. So the first thing when the patient uses these devices is that they talk to us about comfort. There is nothing bothering them, and from a clinical perspective, we can even scan patients who have poor fixation or little fixation because the acquisition time is extremely fast.
Full range, what does that mean?
So full range is another technical term that is interesting. It is a capability to have better resolution across all analysis fields. And it makes perfect sense to have a wider OCT analysis field with better resolution. And what we see today is that before we talked about an OCT field that went up to 6 millimeters, then 10, 12, and well, today we are at 17 millimeters and at 24 millimeters, which is simply enormous.
So that was for the little one. Now, for the very large one.
Indeed, the very large one allows for ultra-wide field OCT. And what we see on this device is that we find images of angiography. As we knew with fluorescent angiography, a large ultra-wide field, well, here we have an image of a patient with diabetic retinopathy with very significant ischemias, performed without the injection of contrast agents. And we see in its large periphery these ischemic areas that will help us directly, without the injection of contrast agents, to identify the areas that need to be treated with laser, thus having a very strong clinical impact.
Without injection, it is an enormous comfort for the patient, and it is also a workflow that has accelerated for the practitioner.
we are re-evaluating the entire management of patients. We already knew OCT angiography. We have known OCT angiography for several years, mainly for the central macular area. So we know that there are patients with age-related macular degeneration who have already had less angiography because OCT angiography exists in the central part. Well, this is an additional evolution for pathologies. And in my opinion, it is especially for vascular pathologies, retinal vein occlusion, diabetic retinopathies, everything that affects peripheral vascularization.
We see that you have both machines here. Is it mandatory to have both, or is one sufficient? How does it work?
No, certainly not. We are here in a reference center, an imaging center, meaning that most of our patients are referred for second, third, or fourth opinions. Therefore, we must be at the top of our game. And if we want to be at the top today, we need to have both. That's why we can have the classic machine that will meet 80% of ophthalmologists' needs and the Formula One for more patients referred with very specific research.
So it has an obvious interest for the retina. Does it have an interest for other pathologies?
Indeed. What is interesting is that we are not talking about a device that is solely dedicated to the retina, but rather due to its properties, it will interest the entire field of ophthalmology. The field of ophthalmology ranges from the anterior segment to the posterior segment. So we are discussing ultra high performance devices for analyzing the anterior segment, the cornea, the lens, the angle, the anterior chamber, but also the posterior segment with the retina, as you can see, but also glaucoma. So these are devices we call combos that will focus on the entirety of the ophthalmology application field.
You mentioned earlier when we prepared for this interview, the deep tissues that we can see much better with this technology.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the first things that strikes you. In fact, when we take these machines in hand and use them, we are struck by the quality of the signal on the deep layers. The first two things that stand out are the quality of the field, and the second is the visualization of the choroid. The choroid is a deep layer beneath the retina. And with this device, we have a visualization of the choroid like we have never had before, with a resolution and mapping tools that will allow us to track the choroid in retinal pathologies.
These two machines recently received CE marking, so they are available. Between the little brother and the big brother, I suppose there is a price difference.
So yes, there is a price difference between the two. We are talking about a range from 1 to 2 times the price, but the smaller one will really cater to the vast majority of ophthalmology, while the larger one is for more specific requests. However, it will certainly have a certain success because we already know that it is gaining traction worldwide.
TowardPi is the brand of these two machines, a brand we do not hear about often. How come?
Well, yes, there is still a paradigm shift because we were familiar with the classic manufacturers of OCT and imaging in ophthalmology. Here we are dealing with a Chinese brand, so it is a bit of a novelty for us, and we are learning to get to know it. But behind it, there is substantial development, expertise, and factories that manufacture all the parts, meaning the entirety of the machine, which provides total independence. But it is true that it is a novelty, and we are learning to use these machines.
And it is distributed by a French distributor?
Yes, that is ideal, meaning that the manufacturer is Chinese, certainly, but our contact is EBC, a French distributor, which means we can communicate in French and present our issues in French.
Given the novelty, I suppose this is not the last time we will hear about these machines. Are you potentially going to publish anything?
Indeed, it is a new chapter that is opening. In fact, there are other devices coming into the sector. This is the first to be used in clinical practice. So yes, this is a blank page, especially in France. We were the first. So now we are already conducting studies on the neuro, on the retina, on the macula. And so I invite you to the SFO in May 2025 for the first communications and the first results with these machines in our patients.
The appointment is set. The news team will be there.
Thank you.